The world is deeply divided. On one side, nations build skyscrapers that pierce the clouds and industries that forge the future. On the other, nations are caught in a desperate struggle for the most basic necessities. But why? Why do some countries prosper, while others seem destined to stay poor, no matter how much aid they receive? It's not just about geography or natural resources. It's not about the intelligence or work ethic of the people. The real answer is hidden beneath centuries of history, and it's far more complex and unsettling than you might imagine. Let's travel back to the early 17th century. As Europe was just beginning to embrace trade and industry, a small building opened its doors in Amsterdam. It wasn't a palace or a marketplace. It was a bank, the world's first true modern bank. Its purpose seemed simple: make lending easier, facilitate trade, and build trust in money. But its impact was revolutionary. It created a framework for economic power itself. For the first time in history, capital could move freely. Merchants could borrow funds for grand voyages, build factories, or invest in new inventions. Risk was no longer a personal burden. It could be shared, measured, and even sold. This single innovation, though it seemed purely technical, would go on to shape the destiny of entire nations. Countries that adopted these new financial systems flourished. Those that couldn't, or weren't allowed to, were left behind. Think about England. In 1694, following the Glorious Revolution, the Bank of England was established. This wasn't just a financial move, it was a political one. By issuing government debt, backing the currency, and creating a reliable credit system, England could suddenly fund wars, expand its global trade, and pour money into the industries that would ignite the Industrial Revolution. Money had become a tool of power, invisible, abstract, but utterly unstoppable. Meanwhile, a very different story was unfolding in other parts of the world. In many nations across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, colonization and conquest were creating a completely different economic path. Instead of developing their own institutions to foster growth, these regions were stripped of their capital. Their economies were redesigned to serve distant empires, leaving them without the tools to invest in their own futures. Even after these countries gained independence, the legacy of that extraction persisted. Nations with weak institutions, unstable legal systems, and no secure property rights found it almost impossible to attract investment. Entrepreneurs couldn't safely borrow money, banks couldn't reliably lend it, and innovation came to a standstill. Trust, an invisible lubricant of any healthy economy, was simply missing. And as history has shown time and again, without that foundational trust, even an abundance of natural resources can't generate lasting wealth. This brings us to a strange paradox known as the resource curse. Why do so many nations rich in oil, diamonds, or gold often remain poor? It's because when vast resource wealth meets weak institutions, it tends to concentrate power and money in the hands of a corrupt few. It discourages broad-based investment and innovation. Unlike a structured bank-driven economy that encourages growth in all sectors, raw resource wealth alone can't create a self-sustaining system. It can actually trap countries in devastating cycles of conflict, inequality, and stagnation. But this story isn't just about misfortune. It's about choices, policies, and human psychology. Trust, discipline, and forward-thinking leadership are incredibly powerful forces. Countries that have historically invested in education, infrastructure, legal systems, and transparent government are the ones most likely to break free from poverty. Those that fail to do so often find themselves trapped, as the sheer momentum of history seems to fight against change. There are some surprising twists in this tale. Consider a seemingly minor decision by a government to allow free trade, to establish a national bank, or to protect private property. Each of these choices triggers a cascade of effects that unfold over decades, even centuries. One nation's early adoption of a stable banking system allows its businesses to grow exponentially. Another nation's failure to do the same leads to economic stagnation. Small decisions, magnified over time, create the massive gaps in wealth and opportunity we see today. Human behavior also plays a silent but powerful role. Fear of instability leads people to hoard their money instead of investing it. Distrust in institutions pushes economic activity into underground, untaxed markets. Corruption undermines even the most well-intentioned reforms. The invisible architecture of a society, its laws, its social norms, its systems of accountability, ultimately determines whether capital can flow freely or gets trapped in cycles of inefficiency. By the middle of the 20th century, the divide had become stark. Countries with strong financial institutions, functional legal systems, and a commitment to education surged ahead. Others, despite receiving foreign aid and having abundant natural resources or human potential, lagged far behind. Aid alone could never replicate the momentum built over centuries of institutional stability. Wealth isn't a gift. It's the product of trust, foresight, and cumulative advantage. Even today, the echoes of these historical choices are all around us. Nations that built robust financial institutions generations ago continue to benefit from compound growth. Countries that were subjected to extraction, instability, or poor governance are still grappling with those fundamental economic challenges. The causes are structural, embedded in the very DNA of their societies. And yet, this story is not without hope. History also shows us that change is possible, though it is often slow and painstaking. Look at South Korea. Once impoverished after the Korean War, it invested heavily in education, strong institutions, and strategic industrial policy. Today, it stands among the wealthiest nations in the world. Consider Rwanda. Emerging from the devastation of genocide, it has built one of Africa's most dynamic economies by prioritizing good governance, modern infrastructure, and technology. The blueprint is clear. Stable institutions, trust, investment in people, and visionary policies can alter a nation's trajectory. So, why do some countries stay poor? The answer is not simple or deterministic. It's a complex web of historical circumstances, institutional choices, human behavior, and even a bit of chance. A country's wealth or its poverty is not a reflection of its resources or its people. It is a reflection of the systems it builds, the trust it fosters, and the choices it makes over generations. Those first banks may have seemed like just buildings filled with ledgers and coins, but in reality, they were engines of destiny. They were catalysts that amplified human ambition, channeled risk, and created structures that could endure for centuries. The nations that embraced these engines built societies capable of sustained growth. The nations that missed the lesson or were denied the opportunity were left to struggle. And the consequences of that divergence ripple forward, even today. Economic disparity is not destiny, but it is historical. It's written in ledgers, inscribed in institutions, and etched into the collective memory of societies. But understanding the hidden mechanics of wealth and the long shadows of history is the first step toward changing it. Because in the end, wealth isn't magic. It is method. It is structure, foresight, and trust. And for nations still trapped in poverty, the story of the first bank is a powerful reminder. Systems matter, history matters, and with the right choices, no country has to remain poor forever. Thanks for watching. If you found this perspective valuable, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world.